Hello, I'm Bob Schieffer, and welcome to Washington Unplugged, our new weekly webcast on politics. You'll find us every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time at cbsnews.com/Washington Unplugged. What we'll try to do here every Friday is keep you ahead of the news, and every indication is that next week's big story will be what the Senate does with the economic stimulus package that the House passed on Wednesday. It passed, but with no support from Republicans. We'll talk about where it goes from here with a key Republican in the Senate, Richard Shelby of Alabama, who's the ranking Republican on the Banking Committee. We'll also bring in Deputy White House Press Secretary Bill Burton to talk about getting the president's legislative program going in the midst of moving into a new office and a new home. Anybody who's moved knows that alone is a daunting task. Later, we'll be joined by CBS News White House correspondent Chip Reed, our chief political consultant Mark Ambender, and Politico.com's Nia Malika Henderson to talk about the new administration's new approach. And guess who's coming to dinner in Washington? We're going to tell you because you'll never guess. But let's start with Senator Shelby on Capitol Hill. Well, Senator Shelby, you're one of the key members of the Senate as a ranking Republican on the Banking Committee. We know what happened to this legislation in the House. It passed, but with no support from Republicans. What's going to happen to it in the Senate?
Well, that's a good question. That's what's going to unfold next week in the Senate. I hope, Bob, excuse me, that the Republicans can stay together. I haven't done a vote count, but if we stay together, they won't pass that bill. But I'm doubtful. I think that there'll be some Republicans will jump on the bandwagon and jump ship. But I think it's a bad piece of legislation.
So what would have to be done to this piece of legislation to make it acceptable for you to vote for it, Senator?
I think we'd have to basically scuttle it, do a 180-degree turn. I talked to the president last Tuesday, I believe, when he came to the Republican caucus, and I told him, I said, Mr. President, we want you to succeed because you're our president. But I believe you have your priorities wrong. I said, until we get rid of the cancer in the banking system, nothing's going to really turn around in this country because banks are not lending. And if they're not lending, you're not going to create jobs. You're going to continue to lose jobs. We've got to attack the portfolios of these banking institutions. It's bad. It's going to get worse. And if we look at the history, and this is what I said to the president, I said, if we look at the history of stimulus packages all the way from the 30s, they're checkered at best.
What do you mean when you say you've got to attack the portfolios of these banks?
What I mean, Bob, our banks are loaded with toxic assets. All of, mainly our money center banks, but some of our smaller banks too, and regional banks. They've got securities. They don't know what's in those portfolios. Obviously, Bank of America didn't know what was in the portfolio of Merrill Lynch when they acquired it in December. Until we do something like we did, similar maybe to what we did in the thrift era, you'll recall that, where we took a lot of their assets, we closed a lot of the banks, and then we sold them off. We lost some money. The taxpayer lost about $150 billion. But we saved our banking system. And until the banks know what they have and start lending again, have capital, people aren't going to invest. Bob, there's probably $3 or $4 trillion, maybe more, lying around in America. People are in cash. They're afraid to invest. They don't trust the banking system, and they shouldn't, or a lot of it. They don't trust Wall Street, and they shouldn't, because see, that's where the financial cancer came from. And you can see now and I called it an incestuous financial relationship between Goldman Sachs, and it looks like a revolving door. That's why I believe we need transparency in our banking system. We need accountability. We don't have it.
So what you're talking about is closing some of these banks,
Absolutely.
taking some of these bad loans that they've got on
That's
their
right.
books, putting them into some sort of government entity like the Resolution Trust Corporation we had back in those thrift days?
That is one option. Another option is trying to get a lot of private money here. There's a lot more private money. The government has no money. They go borrowing this money. The money is in the private sector, and there's a lot of it if people knew what was in these banks. They don't know, and they're on the sideline.
So let's get back to the legislation you're going to be dealing with next week. You're totally against this as it now stands.
Absolutely, because I don't believe it's going to turn the economy around. There's a lot of political things. There's some good things in there. Always some good things in a package. And people clamor and said, oh gosh, you got to vote for it. But if you look at it, it's going to be nearly $1 trillion. $1 trillion more. It's probably going to take at least another $1 trillion dealing with the financial institutions. I don't know where the money comes from. We borrow it from the private sector. We ought to get the private sector involved.
And you're saying, can this bill pass the Senate without any Republican support as it did pass the House, Senator?
Oh, absolutely not. We could keep talking about it. If the Republicans stay together, we have 41 of us, this bill won't pass. What I'm afraid of is we'll have a few Republicans will jump ship. I hope they won't.
But in the end, at this point, you're saying that Republicans just don't like this approach, and from what I'm hearing from you, you don't want anything to do with it.
Well, I don't want any of this. I think they have the priorities mixed up. We ought to attack the banking crisis first. That will help stabilize the economy and put people back to work a lot quicker than this stimulus package, which is a political statement, at least 3/4 of it.
All right. Senator Richard Shelby, a very influential member of the Senate and someone who we have just found out continues to tell it like it is. Thank you very much, Senator. This is Washington Unplugged, but we are joined now by some of Washington's most plugged in, CBS News White House correspondent Chip Reed, our chief political consultant Mark Ambender, and Politico's Nia Malika Henderson. Well, this has been quite a week. The president got that big stimulus package through the House, but with not one single Republican vote. Chip Reed, how does the president feel about this week?
Well, clearly he's a bit disappointed, but they believe that if they just keep working on that bipartisan front, they are going to be able to get Republican votes in the Senate. After they change the bill, they're going to have to make some changes, and probably some fairly substantive changes. And then they believe when it goes back to the House and they get together and have their conference, as they call it, they're going to be able to get Republican votes in the House. Maybe they're being optimistic, I'm not sure, but they seem to be pretty confident. You know, he had a bunch of Republicans and Democrats for a cocktail party over here the other night. I don't think anybody had to be driven home afterward. It wasn't very wild, but and he's also having Republicans and Democrats over for a Super Bowl party. So he's going to continue working it very hard, working the Republicans. The thing is, he has a lot of Republican friends. They really like him, but that doesn't mean they're going to vote with him. We'll see.
Well, Mark Ambender, do you think maybe the fix was in? Do you think maybe they put a bunch of stuff into this bill, the bill that passed the House, so there would be something to take out of it when it gets to the Senate, and then everybody could make their point? It goes to a conference committee after that, and then the House will vote on it.
Well, they certainly put a lot more in the bill than can be construed as direct stimulus, and a lot of the major programs that Republicans object to are programs that Democrats have been wanting for years, programs ordinarily that Democrats would have to spend time putting through the budget process, which is an immensely political process, so it's easier to do under the cover of an emergency stimulus. On the other hand, there have been a lot of Democratic interest groups who have wanted a lot of these small planks, family planning funds, for example, which Obama asked to be removed. So either by design or by simply the games of Washington, it was inevitable that a lot was going to be taken out, and I think you'll see significant revisions to the Senate's bill, and what comes out of conference in a couple weeks, I don't really think anybody knows at this point.
You know, Nia, Senator Shelby told us on this webcast he doesn't like anything about it, and he's a key Republican over there. He said he did not think that every Republican could vote against it in the Senate, but they might. Right. He thinks they just need to start over.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly, I mean, the Republicans were certainly kind of crowing about how they stood up in the House, all 177, voted against this thing. But I think, like Mark said, I mean, there's going to be some shedding and some changing of this bill. And we already saw President Obama, kind of lean on Pelosi and some of those Democratic leaders and say, hey, let's take out some of this family planning legislation, which was about, contraception, and really kind of, I think, what McCain would call goodies. He would always say, oh, these bills are kind of laden with goodies. And so, yeah, there's going to be a lot of changes and lots more votes to come out of this thing.
I'll say one thing. He really has changed the tone. I mean, it is a different kind of White House just looking at it.
Mm-hmm. It is amazing to see the President of the United States spend his working day on Capitol Hill simply listening to the concerns of the opposition party, extending. He was supposed to be in a private meeting with House Republicans for an hour. He spent 2 hours there because they had more questions. This will buy him, I think, cooperation down the road when, for example, the White House proposes something that Senator Shelby wants, which is a way to buy the assets of the troubled assets of these banks and securitize them in a way that gets the banks to begin lending again. So the White House considers this, as Chip said, as an investment in bipartisanship.
One thing for sure, Chip, he is getting to know the people on Capitol Hill. I think one of the things that happened to the Bush administration is that a lot of them came to Washington saying, look, we're from Texas. We're not a part of Washington. We don't want to be a part of Washington. I think the result was that they may have made their point, but they really didn't get to know the town and how things work here. And as a result, I think a lot of their problems stem from just that.
That's right, and to some degree the Clinton administration made that same mistake, and many administrations before that. And President Obama has made very clear that not only is he going to work hard with Democrats, but he's going to work just as hard so far, if not harder. Given those 2 meetings he had up there with only Republicans, he's going to work very hard with Congress, and he's going to listen to them. And I tell you what was really most amazing when he came out of that meeting with the Republicans was how impressed they were. I mean, some of the real hardcore Republicans said, there's not a chance in the world I'm going to vote for this thing, but I really like this guy. And as Mark just said, that will pay off in the long run on other issues.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of you. You are watching Washington Unplugged on CBSNews.com. And welcome back to Washington Unplugged, CBSNews.com's cutting-edge politics webcast. Psychologists will tell you that moving is one of the most traumatic of life's experiences, right up there with divorce, funerals, and getting married. So what's it like when you're moving into the White House with a couple of other things, like an economic crisis, trouble in the Middle East, and 2 wars on your mind? We talked about that with one of Barack Obama's key staffers, Deputy White House Press Secretary Bill Burton. Well, Bill, you are one of those people who's been around Washington for a while. You've had various jobs on the Hill, other political jobs. You worked in the campaign, but now here you are moving into the White House. We all know it's tough to move, but when you got a lot of things on your mind on top of that, what's it been like in these first days over there?
Well, it's been pretty great, frankly. We worked towards this for the last 2 years in order to have the opportunity to come to the White House and serve the American people. And now that we're actually here, it's hard not to feel a real sense of history and meaning every time you walk through those doors. And right from the starting gate, the president wanted to have an aggressive and urgent agenda. And so we've gotten right to work. There are a couple of technical hiccups here and there, and people are still finding their offices on their way to the White House mess, but overall it's been a great transition into the White House, and we're having what has been a really productive and successful first week, I think.
But it has been a challenge, as to my understanding. I'm told that the voicemail didn't work for a while. Obviously, a lot of people didn't know exactly where their offices were going to be. There was trouble with the computers. How are you coming along on all that?
We're coming along great. When email was down for a little while, even though there were some frustrations that come along with it, it was also a good opportunity to actually talk to some of our colleagues in the media and actually walk back and see them in their offices instead of just the cold communication that comes with email. So things are going fine, though. The email's up, the computers are working, people have found their offices, and things are rolling along just fine. We need a big infrastructure in order to get done the work that we need to get done, and it's in place, and we're moving forward at a pretty aggressive pace.
But that's pretty interesting. You just said you had to have face-to-face conversations with people. I guess for some of the young people in the campaign, that was kind of a different thing, I guess, wasn't it?
It had a novelty to it, especially for those of us who were in Chicago for 2 years. We didn't see a whole lot of the National Press Corps except when they came out to town to visit from time to time. So now that we're here and we're settled in, we've been able to do a lot of things. The president signed equal pay into law. The House was able to pass his economic recovery and reinvestment plan, and now it goes to the Senate, where there's a lot more work to do with Democrats and Republicans to get this done as fast as we can in the most efficient and effective way that we can to get the economy moving again.
And we found out this week, this is somebody who knows a little bit about wintertime and snow. When Washington closed the schools, of course, everybody in Washington knows the first time it snows, it's the first time it's ever snowed here.
Yeah, that's right.
The town just shuts down, and the new president managed to say this would have been nothing in Chicago. And I noticed one of his kids, he reported, said, well, we'd have had recess in weather like this. So I guess they're doing a little adjusting too.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody's adjusting, but I think that we've been able to settle in. We had the transition period where there's a lot of work going on so that we would be able to hit the ground running from Inauguration Day. But there was also a transition period for those of us who are moving back to Washington or coming here for the first time, or the Obama family moving here altogether. So I think that we've transitioned here. We've hit the ground running. We're working hard. And things are really moving.
Let's talk a little business here. Richard Shelby, who's one of the key Republicans in the Senate, said flatly he doesn't like anything that's in the president's stimulus package. He's like the Republicans over in the House. He's not sure that it's going to get very much support from Republicans in the Senate. What are you going to have to do to get that bill passed in the Senate?
Well, this is a long process, and we've just started with the House passing the plan just this week. The president is going to do what he's already started doing, which is work with Republicans and Democrats in order to get a plan that can get agreement on both sides of the aisle. And so he was up on Capitol Hill. He's invited Republicans and Democrats here to the White House already. On Sunday, there'll be a bunch here to watch the Super Bowl with him. And what we're going to do, what the president's going to continue to do, is make sure that we're getting as many good ideas as we can into this plan and make sure that it is as effective and moves as fast as it possibly can. Just today, new numbers show that the economy has contracted some 3.8% over the course of the last quarter. Biggest contraction in the last 25 years. There was a real need to get something done, and I think the Americans expect that Republicans and Democrats with the president are going to work to get this done for the American people, to get the economy moving again.
But between now and then, a big Super Bowl party at the White House.
That's right. It'll be a Super Bowl party. I think we'll try to put partisan politics aside for one night to watch the Steelers and the Cardinals take it on. The president and the vice president both said that they'll be rooting for the Steelers on Sunday. It should be a fun time. It'll be a good group of lawmakers and friends of the president. And I think it'll be a good opportunity for folks to see each other outside of the context of just the negotiations over legislation, and instead see families and kids and actually be able to get together on that level.
Does the president bet on sports events, or would you tell me if he did?
If he does, I don't know about it.
All right. Bill Burton, thanks a lot. Hope to talk to you again.
Thanks, Bob.
Finally today, guess who's coming to dinner in Washington? Alaska Governor Sarah Palin, that's who, and it's not some potluck supper in a church basement. It's one of those big Washington dinners being put on this weekend by the Alfalfa Club. It's a lot like the White House Correspondents Association dinner without the White House correspondents. The guests include a lot of A-list Washington swells, politicians, movers, shakers, and they'll all be decked out in white tie and tails. And am I hearing this right, that Governor Palin said it's a good chance to have dinner with the president? I wonder if Katie Couric is going. Maybe she could buttonhole the governor for another quick interview. We'd sure put it on Face the Nation Sunday. We've already booked Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, New York Senator Chuck Schumer, and New York Times columnist David Brooks, but we'd find a place for that one if she gets the interview. We'll see you then, and of course, on CBSNews.com.